Everybody, welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee. The first item on the agenda is to elect the chair for the 2023-24 municipal year. Can I have nominations, please?
Chairman, could I nominate Mrs. Paula O'Connor, please?
Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Any other nominations? Okay, all in favour? Okay, thank you very much. Paula O'Connor is elected chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for reappointing me into the chair role. I look forward to working with you all again for the next municipal year. If we can move on then to the election of the vice chair for the 23-24 municipal year 2. Can we have a nomination?
Yes, I'll nominate Paxton Hood-Williams.
Any other nominations? No. Okay, so the vice chair will be Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members.
If we can move on to agenda item 3, which is apologies for absence, please.
Apologies from Councillors Michael Locke, Kelly Roberts and Mike Lewis, and also from Gordon Anderson.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, disclosures of personal interest, please. Prejudicial. No disclosures? No. Thank you. If we move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 17th of May 23, if we can take them page by page for accuracy first, please. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Can I have hands up if they're an accurate reflection of that meeting, please? Hands in the room. Hands on the screen. Yes. Thank you very much indeed. If we can now move on to the Internal Audit Monitoring Report Quarter 4. It's a for information report, and if I can welcome Simon Cockings to take us through this report, please, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well. This is the Quarter 4 Standard Monitor Report from Internal Audit, summarising the work that was completed in Quarter 4. A lot of the information here is repeated from the annual report from the previous meeting, obviously because that had to feed into the annual opinion and the AGS. So some of this is duplicated from there. It's just a summary really of the work completed in Quarter 4. So as you can see in 2.1, 29 audits were finalised in the quarter, 9 with a high assurance rating, 17 with a substantial assurance rating, and 3 with a moderate level of assurance. In total, 196 recommendations were made and 194 were accepted. Only 2 low-risk recommendations weren't accepted, and they can be found in Appendix 3. So there's not really that much detail there to be concerned about. A lot of the information in the rest of Section 2 is repeated from the end-of-year report. The key thing I'd like to draw members' attention to really is 2.13 to 2.15. Which summarises some of the detail of the moderate audit reports that were issued in the quarter. I wasn't planning to go into any detail with these, Chair, as we have officers attending the meeting to go into them in further detail in further reports. So these are basically summaries of the key points that led to the moderate rating. But obviously officers will go into further detail with further agenda items after this report has been presented. So yeah, the appendices basically give a summary of the reports that were issued. So Appendix 1 gives a list of all of the final reports that were issued in the quarter. And then the scope of the reviews is included in Appendix 2, with the summary information of the recommendations that weren't implemented in Appendix 3. And again, those were low risk and not considered to be too much of an issue for us. So yeah, that's the summary of the report, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on this, and obviously officers will be able to explain more detail in relation to the moderates later on.
Thank you, Simon. With the moderate reports, I propose that we take questions on those moderate reports when the individual reports come up with the officers presenting at the same time, rather than duplicate questions at this agenda item, as well as later on in the agenda. So I agree with you, Simon. You know, the purpose of the officers being here is to be able to answer the detailed questions if we have them, and you can support that. So before I open up then, are there any other questions for Simon that don't relate to those 3 moderate reports? Any hands up in the room?
I think Julie's got her hand up, Chair.
Julie. Okay, Julie. You're on mute, Julie. Julie, you're on mute.
Sorry, I understand what you're saying about not questioning Simon in relation to the moderate reviews, but I do have a question in relation to the fleet management review, which I think Simon is probably best placed to answer. So is that okay for me to ask it now? And if you think I need to put it back to the officers, then I can re-ask it.
It's
I'd
fine,
rather
Julie,
take
yeah.
the, I'd
It's up
rather
to you,
take
Chair.
them all. No, I'd rather take them all at the same time as those reports being presented, if
Okay.
that's okay, Julie.
Okay then, so I do have a couple of smaller points, Simon. At previous audit committees, we've discussed risk management in education, and Nick and Beavers Kelly Small, the officer in charge for education, we're going to discuss risk management in the individual schools, because that hasn't been covered off as part of the central education risk management review. Would you be able to give us assurance that risk management is now going to be included in the schools programmes?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. In relation to the risk management audit for the current year, as you know, that's on a rotational basis. So this year's risk management audit was in education. We have picked up a lot of the points in relation to risk management in schools, and that has been addressed by Kelly and by Jeff Fish in that area. I don't mind, Jeff, if you don't mind me asking to come into the meeting at this point to explain what's been done in relation to risk management. But I know work has been done within education to address that issue, and it is ongoing, Julie. So it is something we picked up as part of that review. Jeff, I'm not sure if you're happy to make some comments on that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me in so early, Simon. I wasn't
Sorry,
expecting
Jeff.
that. Much appreciated. Hi, Julie. Hi, Chair. Hi, members. Nice to see you with my new hat on. Yeah, just picking up on your point, Julie. Obviously, I'd had prior exposure to this matter, obviously in my former role, and obviously it then came to my attention and Kelly Small's attention. So we've had a number of meetings. We work with Richard Rowlands in relation to his experience on risk and how that could be implemented at a school level. There are some problems in terms of a whole, excuse the phrase, a whole school approach and implementation at a school level at the moment, particularly around the industrial action around ASOS, because it wouldn't be a statutory requirement, but we're working around that. And we've had a series of meetings with Simon and Nick in terms of how that can be framed and address the concerns and give the committee the assurances that you're seeking around that matter. So they discussions are happening apace, and we would hope to be coming back to through Simon with a finalised plan of action for that to give you that assurance, Julie. So it's been given a real focus over the last 3 months.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question, Simon, in relation to commercial services. On page 23 of the pack, I recognise that the review identified several important findings in relation to the required update of AI4 and financial procedure rules, and that 15 out of 20 transactions sampled couldn't justify the raising of a retrospective purchase order. And 2 further reviews identified non-compliance with CPRs, which is fleet management and pension fund other transactions, on page 24 of the pack. So what assurance can you give the committee that actions have been assigned to the appropriate action owners, either within commercial services for the council as a whole or individual service areas, to minimise the risk of recurrence?
I'll have to look back at the report for the detail of that, Julie, but I know we do look at procurement compliance across all of the orders that we do for expenditure testing. So if we do find an area that's not compliant, that is addressed to the relevant service manager in that area. We do also have a broader compliance audit on the plan for the current financial year in terms of CPR compliance, which is a broader audit, which will look at broader areas in the current financial year, Julie. So it's more of a broad review of compliance across different directorates, shall we say. So that is something we've added in for this year, as it was one of the governance issues that was flagged up in the AGS for the last financial year. So that has been built into the current year's programme to look at that in more detail, to give committee more assurance in that area. But when we do come across non-compliance, we do build that into and address it to the relevant service manager for the review that's been undertaken. But that has been taken on board for the current work programme, Julie, to look at that in more detail in the current year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Julie. Are there any more questions? Ben Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to come in following up on Julie's point. Given some of those wider compliance matters, it's also the case that Chris Williams, the Head of Commercial Services, has come to CMT on 2 occasions in relative quick succession and will be scheduled in again for some of the wider UK-wide legislation around procurement requirements through a post-Brexit. Chris is one of my direct reports, and obviously as your statutory officer on this committee, Commercial Services sits under me, so that should give you some additional comfort that we have escalated it through other means to address some of that point you're making about wider compliance issues as well as service-specific ones, which, as Simon said, will continue to be picked up in the individual reports. And it's for the reason Simon has said that it's been identified for a number of years in the annual governance statement. So that should give you some further assurance, and I hope that's a helpful intervention on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Just adding to that procurement, I was at a scrutiny conference yesterday, and there were a number of other members of this committee at that conference, and procurement was certainly going to be a proposal to put on the next work plan for scrutiny. So I think there are a number of areas where this has been given the focus it needs, as well as the additional leverage by the CMT. Are there any other questions on Simon's report? I've just got Mike.
In regards to procurement, we did carry out, there's been a full 12 months of scrutiny, in-depth committee set up for procurement, which we have concluded, and the report went to Cabinet, and I gather quite a lot of those areas where we asked to look at were actually approved. And I know that in regards to the issue where we've been picking up things mainly around education, I know that the education department have been working closely with procurement to get this information out to schools for them to understand the rulings around the actual ruling of procurement. So I don't know whether the scrutiny board will just want to have a follow-up for us to have a follow-up meeting of that scrutiny panel that was previously in existence, but quite an extensive in-depth scrutiny report was carried out last year.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, following off what Mike has actually said, I think, there is a follow-up meeting for procurement, to actually take place anyway. So I think that's definitely in the pipeline. I think they're going to appraise the report. And I must admit, the report on fleet today, I think is a subject that will be included in that.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there are a couple of audits that are making reference to expenditure over 10k around procurement issues within Simon's report, and I think it's right and proper that this committee raised concern with the some non-compliance with the procedures. I just have one question to you, Simon, on page 25, and it's regards to the ground maintenance and central operations. In the reasoning comments column, you mentioned that the service didn't agree with the finding and request that this testing is removed from the schedule. Can you expand on that for the committee, please?
Yeah, I believe from memory, Chair, it's been a while since I've looked at this report, I'll be honest, but I think this is primarily in relation to resource issues within the area. Historically, they've been doing a 10% physical check within the service, which from an audit perspective makes sense to us for, for assurance purposes. I believe it was due to resource issues that was no longer taking place, and I don't think the service could see a way to implement that given the existing resources. I believe that is the reason behind why they asked it to be removed, because they couldn't see a reasonable way to reintroduce it. But it's been left in the report primarily because it had been done in the past, and it did provide some assurance over procedures. So that was a discussion that was had with the relevant service manager at the time, and these are their comments in that column, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Just to follow up on that, you identify that that is a low risk area. So you're giving us assurance that the fact that they're unable to implement that 10% check is not going to present a future risk to the council.
No, there were very, very few other issues within the service, and our test didn't uncover any issues, Chair. This was just a secondary assurance check, basically, which unfortunately couldn't be facilitated due to resources at the time.
Thank you, Simon. Julie, is your hand back up?
Oh, yes, sorry, Chair. Simon, I thought from reading the report, and in fairness, we've only just read it, I thought that perhaps the bonus system had been removed, and that was what the 10% check was involved with. So if the bonus system has been taken away, perhaps they don't need to perform these tests now. I might be wrong, but perhaps when you revisit the report, you can check that.
Yeah, I'll double check, Julie, but I think this is to do with ground maintenance rather than any other reports in the pack. So I'm not sure where the data would come from for that. But this is more of a physical internal check rather than anything related to bonuses, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. If there are no
Sorry,
further
Leslie?
questions. Leslie?
Yeah, just very quickly following on from that, I can see the point at the moment, but presumably you'll keep an eye on this, and if it can be reviewed in the future, if it's necessary, it can be brought back into play again.
Exactly right, Leslie. That's why I've left it in the programme to check when we do this audit again. So if there is capacity to reintroduce these checks, I've left it in the programme to see if that can be reintroduced at that time.
Right, thanks.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Simon. And no other hands up? No. Sorry, Nick Davis.
Yeah, hi there, Chair. I just want to expand on what Simon said, really, with the ground maintenance. That we'd spoken to the service manager around these 2 points, and we were assured at the time that the service manager was going to look at some alternative ways to look at these checks within the service. So it's certainly not that type of checking that they were doing has now finished. But he was going to look at other ways of doing that sort of check. So I spoke to him directly after the audit because I wanted to discuss the issues around these 2 recommendations that had been disagreed, and assurances were given to me that he was looking at alternative ways to find another way to look at these checks. So we are monitoring it, and we will be looking at it going forward. If we do take out those 2 tests, we will be adding in, once we speak to the service manager, we will be adding some further checks in going forward.
Thank you, Nick. If there are no further questions, no hands in the room. I can't see any hands up. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon, for presenting the Q4 report. And if you could pass on our thanks as well to the team for managing to complete as much as they have done in that quarter as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is one of the first moderate reports on fleet maintenance. I'm sure there are going to be a number of questions around this report, but if I can invite, is it Mark Barrow? Stuart Davis, is it?
Yeah, sorry, Mark Barrow. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Mark Barrow is not available today, so I've just come in to sort of give to cover for him on this one. So I hadn't intended to run through the report. Obviously, there's a report in response to the audit included in the pack, and in Appendix B is the sort of kind of work plan really to address the issues from the non-conformities raised in terms of on that. What I would say in terms of on there is that the as with the number of areas, the amount of resources are stretched really in terms of what they're doing. And this is from the fleet perspective over the last 2 or 3 years. They've continued full tilt throughout the pandemic. There was no sort of delay in terms of activities. They also moved a vehicle workshop, which took a lot of resources in terms of through that period. So, and obviously the key part of the focus of the service is to continue providing the vehicles. Somewhere in the region of 850 odd vehicles across the whole authority and about £10 million worth of expenditure to ensure that services are continued to be provided and that the vehicles are provided in a safe manner, because from an operational perspective, the highest risk for us is to have vehicles which are not fit for purpose and the impact it would have on road users and the services. So there is a work plan in place there to address the issues. Obviously, there's a note down about the level of resourcing. It's a conversation I've already started with my director to sort of see whether they want to sort of add additional resources in to meet the compliance on these. But I think the areas that have been flagged up, it's about generally it's about procedures with CPRs and things. The actual suppliers which are used are ones where, although the CPRs having waivers and different things or frameworks in place, it's not a matter that it's uncontrolled expenditure. And what I'd reiterate is that these are operators who, for example, we've got a number of hire vehicles. If you damage a vehicle, you have to go back to that hire company to have the vehicle repaired through them, and we absolutely can get the waiver in terms of in place or the framework, but the rates and things are are very much what they charge. And the same with a number of the specialist vehicle suppliers. Dennis Eagle, for example, with the refuse collection vehicles, you can't sort of go to a number of sort of local garages. These are specialist suppliers. But it's accepted that in some cases the forms have not been sort of filled out, but the work has been done with the intention of delivering best services for the authority and keeping things safe and keeping services operating. So yeah, that's a summary of where we are.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, I'm going to open up to questions and comments. Obviously, it's a moderate assurance report, which is of a concern. So if I can, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, I sympathise with the section. I think it is definitely a resource issue, or it has been in the past anyway. As Stuart has actually said, this is time critical. They need to get the work done to get it done, but then again, it doesn't excuse as such the shall we say non-compliance. I know it actually mentions procurement there. This seems to be a bit of a time lap, really. I think a lot of parts of the council have been, shall we say, brought up to date with contracts. This seems to be something that's actually lagging. Again, going back to the time critical, I think the sooner call-off contracts are actually set up, with these suppliers, the better. One thing I perhaps need clarifying. Item 1.7 on page 37 mentions, I think this is our, shall we say, audit report. It mentions, excuse me a second, 350,000 deemed non-compliant. And then on the fleet manager's report, excuse me a second when I find it. It mentions something like 900,000, with the list of suppliers that are actually there on page 40. So, what is the actual non-compliant figure? Is it 300,000 or is it 947,000? Just for clarification.
My understanding, of it is that that there is waivers and things to cover for the majority of that expenditure. and the remaining expenditure, which is deemed non-compliant, is 350. But excuse me for my lack of familiarity with that, but my understanding is that it is just this, as per the report of the fleet manager, the 300,000 that is in terms of non-compliance with the CPRs.
Thanks.
Could I ask if Nick or Simon can comment on the differences in those figures, please?
I was just going to step in there, Chair. Obviously, I didn't have sight of the main body of the report on page 37. Our sample testing in the table on page 40, that is the contracts that were tested as part of the review. So I'm assuming the 350 that is non-compliant now is what's left over after the waivers have been put in place since the audit report's been issued. So I believe that is what that figure, why there's a difference there. Obviously, action's been taken since the audit report was issued. And I met with Mark and Stuart yesterday to go through a few of the points of this. So I'm assuming our sample testing showed 947k non-compliant as part of our test review. But I believe things have been put in place since that review, and that's where the 350,000 is coming from on page 37.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Thank you. Nick, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to agree with Simon. That table is what we picked up during the audit review with non-compliance, and further to that, then the other figure is basically what Simon's just confirmed.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Simon, for that. Are there any other questions from elected members before I go to the lay members, please? No? No questions? Okay, Julie?
Thank you, Chair. So question first for Simon. Simon, could you outline the risks that either the individual service or the council will be exposed to by non-compliance with CPRs?
You're on mute.
Sorry, thanks, Stuart.
Okay.
Yeah, just in terms of competition and transparency, I think, Julie, we have to be seen to get best value for money for the people of Swansea, and that has to go through a fair and competitive process. So it's not just value for money, it's been open and transparent. So the lack of compliance with CPRs in particular does open us up to challenge, and obviously doesn't necessarily guarantee best value for the people of Swansea. So there's a number of risks there in terms of reputation, value, costs, etc. And obviously, depending on the reputation of the supplier that is used, there's other criteria that would need to be considered in terms of reliability, quality of service, etc. So the CPRs are there for a number of different reasons to safeguard against a lot of those controls and those purposes. So non-compliance, there are a number of different risks, but value for money and reputation, and being called up basically from being uncompetitive, and our approach to procurement are all things to consider in terms of complying with CPRs.
Thank you. And a question to Stuart, if I may. On page 41 of the audit report, it raises a point about high levels of overtime. So can you outline what monitoring of productivity is in place, please, both for routine maintenance and for repair work? And what monitoring is there of outsourced work to ensure you're obtaining value for money from these suppliers?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly from the overtime. What happens is it's variable. Sometimes it increases in terms of damage, in terms of from vehicles. Sometimes from age and reliability of the vehicles if they start waning. So we very much monitor. It isn't a sort of normal expected, a standard expectation of overtime. It does fluctuate with the workload. What we actually do is monitor how the vehicles, the sort of life cost of those vehicles. The council has been investing quite heavily over recent years to modernise the vehicle fleet, and that obviously is a lag in terms of that coming through, and we feel in terms of feeling the benefit. But that's certainly something where the performance is monitored, and the understanding that we're trying to sort of keep the cost down as much as possible. In terms of benchmarking and things, I guess the overall service, we went through a commissioning review a number of years ago, which benchmarked against the private sector to try and understand where our cost base was. to make sure that we're, providing effective services. A lot of this is relating to target times for functions to be carried out. So, for example, for a clutch change or whatever on a vehicle, you'll certainly have what's deemed as book time for it. So it's expected, say, that it'll take on a large vehicle maybe 8 hours, and the performance of individuals are compared against that, and the performance of the workshop to make sure that, for example, our the jobs are not taking excessively long. There are complications to add to that, because if you're dealing with older vehicles in the fleet, then as with anyone who's had experience of an older vehicle, when you take it to the garage, other things sort of come up at the same time. But it is very much benchmarked and monitored. And what I would say with the things like ensuring best value, I know Simon mentioned about the possible risks and things. A lot of the suppliers we're dealing with are single supplier specialists. They're the people who supply the vehicles, and I mentioned the likes of Dennis Eagle. They're they manufacture the sort of refuse collection vehicles. So we have to go to them if it's work that, for example, is beyond the capacity of what we can do, beyond the specialism level of specialism. It's not a case of being able to sort of go out for a tender to, say, 10 local suppliers and say, what can you do? Because what we try and do is very much focus on the larger vehicles, because that tends to be where the cost is higher. So our workforce are very much trained to deal with those and try and take out as much cost as possible in terms of the management of the fleet. So they're trained to a fairly high level of specialism in some of the larger vehicles where the costs are higher. And then where we're not able to do that in-house, we then go to specific suppliers. And although absolutely to be compliant is the ideal, but what I would say is this isn't sort of this isn't sort of financial recklessness where we're missing an opportunity for savings. If there was an opportunity, for example, for us to have reduced rates as a result of going through the CPR processes and things, there would be a very sound business case for having someone in place to do that work. So it would give an added drive to do that. But what we're dealing with is the procedural matters. We're dealing in some cases with single suppliers. So what I would say is that although I can understand the audit terminology of high risk on some of these, what I would say is that that's not a sort of a high financial risk in terms of in here. We're not missing out on significant benefit of cost savings. So and that's something that very much we've got a very small, stretched but good team who work closely with these suppliers. They also very much tap into the best practice networks across Wales and beyond in terms of to understand the cost bases that fleet operating services are working on, and for ensuring that we're delivering the very best we can. But ideally, we would have some more resources for doing some of the things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to say, I'm sure we all in this committee appreciate the support that you give to frontline services.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Leslie Walton, and then Mike. Councillor Walton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really on the same theme, that the one thing that concerns me, one of the risks, is the reputation of your department, because of course, unfortunately, I can understand everything you've said, and I appreciate that it's probably you are doing as good a job as possible money wise, but it's often to do with perception, isn't it, and how people perceive, because they don't know for sure that we're still controlling expenditure, because unfortunately that's the particular compliance issue that's not been done. So I am concerned that I don't want the reputation of your department to be tarnished. And also the other thing that I can see is another risk, particularly because you're short on resources, is that it's easy to slip into carrying on not being compliant, and the longer you leave it, the more difficult it will be to bring it back into action. But I do sympathise totally with the situation you're in, and I'm guessing you're also probably still suffering from the very long-term fallout of COVID. So you've got my sympathies. I think you're caught a bit between a rock and a hard place.
Thank you, Councillor Walton. Yeah, I would agree. I think we're, the ideal is I'm not, I probably won't say this quite right. I think it's a bit of a shame that, for example, there wasn't financial reward from getting the right procedures in place, because you'd have as I say, a very good business case for having more resources. But it is something that obviously from every service who want to be fully compliant. I absolutely support the focus of the service as being on having that availability for vehicles, for having safe vehicles on the network. We don't have any issues with the kind of the focus being in the right area, but it doesn't mean that you can't disregard the sort of the procedural requirements from working for a public sector body. So as I say, we'll started the discussion in terms of with my director. If we feel that we're not going to sort of meet the action plan on there, then I think it's fair and reasonable to look at bringing in additional resources to help sort of achieve that. And as you say, it's a shame if it appears that we're not managing things well, when there's the whole team are really focused on delivering sort of really good positive services and enabling services to be delivered across the authority.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, can you just confirm, obviously, that we have to cover a day-to-day service, normal service of the vehicles because of the size of the fleet, make sure it complies with the MOTs and things like that. So, but of course, then, as you say, because you've got the vehicles that some of the specialized vehicles are providing frontline services for the public, the people of Swansea, essential services. It's important, and perhaps because we don't know you probably wouldn't know what's going to happen by day. As you say, you only have to have a couple of breakdowns, say with RCVs or something like that, then that they've got to be priority. And this is where you would have to kick in the issue of asking people to work overtime. But just if you can confirm that obviously that part of the probably overtime would be probably covered by day-to-day service as well. And I really do appreciate the work that the team that you got within the CTU carry out the first-class job because of the need to provide frontline services.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, it's very much the focus is on achieving that. There's obviously, aside from the kind of moral responsibility to ensure we've got safe, efficient vehicles running, there's also we're bound by things in terms of the operator's license, which puts some there's very understandably very strong regulations surrounding how we operate the large vehicle fleet. Because the safety impact, if there were problems with it, would be much more serious than having smaller vehicles, for example, if they weren't being serviced and maintained properly. So yeah, the focus is around sort of how we sort of distribute the workforce around to cope with the pressures and things. So we obviously fully occupied internally use overtime where there's peaks to sort of help deal with the peaks, and if there's absences, I think for coping with that. And then we also use the use of specialist contractors and the likes for more specialised work, or where we're simply over capacity. So yeah, it is a bit of a balancing act to understand where we are, but done with very much efficiency and good service at the core of what we do.
Phil Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, thank you for your report on fleet maintenance. And perhaps I could start, Chair, with sort of two main things. First of all, if I go right to the end of the report, page 43, and the conclusion, which is section 3. And I'm looking, Simon, at your results there in 3.4, that we've seen a department here that's been non-compliant with procurement regulations dating back to 2008-9, a follow-up in 12-13 non-compliant, 17-18 non-compliant, 19-20 non-compliant, and then in this current review again, significant non-compliance with procurement regulations. So this is not a new area. The other thing is this is a department that spends whatever it is, £9 million plus, of which we've already seen £1 million or so from the testing was all non-compliant. My question firstly for Simon then is what does it take to get a limited assurance report? Because what I'm seeing here is something that's repeatedly failing to achieve procurement regulations and have significant impact. So this high priority recommendation, Simon, surely would give rise to a limited assurance overall. Is that correct?
Just to pick up on that, Phil, obviously the audit was done in 1920 and we would have done a follow-up review of the actions taken since that review. I haven't had to look back at that, but we would have highlighted if there was no action being taken. And when I spoke with Stuart and Mark following the publication of this agenda pack, I was informed that action had been taken following the 1920 audit and things had been put in place. So a number of waivers had been addressed and put in place following the 1920 review. When I spoke to Stuart and Mark, unfortunately, the period covered by this review was over COVID. And the explanation given from Mark and Stuart was that they'd moved garages in that time. The service had to continue throughout that period. They did admit things did seem to have dropped off over that period due to resources and other competing demands. So we would have looked at the outcome of the 1920 review, and if things hadn't been addressed, we would have flagged that up. So that's the rationale there, Phil, that things had been started to be addressed, but they have fallen back into the usual non-compliance. I think that's a fair summary, Stuart. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think a number of areas had been certainly addressed on there. Again, it's this challenge, I think, with resources and, the added, I guess, pressure in terms of coming into, all public bodies is, for example, the carbon zero, the sort of aims, which brings in a whole new dimension with low carbon EVs, electric vehicles, coming in. So that obviously, aside from all the other pressures, so I think but there's certainly a number of actions being taken. So yeah, we're we've got the action plan in place here. So I think if we're not going to be achieving the action plan from this, then I think it's reasonable that more resources are provided to achieve this.
So, Chair, in that case, my second point, because I do believe that inaction on a report like this is a serious matter for this committee. And really, I'm not persuaded by the excuses of saying we're too busy. And I do appreciate they're busy, but so are all the other departments of council.
I'm sorry, can I just take exception to the excuses? I don't, I'm not keen on the terminology there. For
okay,
we've given a rationale
so
that
I'll rephrase then. Reasons for not implementing the recommendations, which in all fairness have been signed up by management with a timetable for implementation. So I'm really surprised that action's not been taken, particularly when non-compliance dates right back to 2008 and 9, as I've said previously. So the issue here is that all departments are required to comply with procurement regulations, and this is a very high spending department. And I don't think it is appropriate for these to be seen as optional. I think they are a requirement. And if you are going to be delivering your service in the way you've described, then being compliant with the council's own regulations is part of that service delivery. You can't say that you're choosing not to do that to keep fleet on the road. This is like a school saying they're prioritising teaching over, for example, getting DBS in place, for example. These are not options, these are requirements, and those requirements should be complied with.
I think your example in terms of DBS is inappropriate in terms of on there, because that relates to child safety. What we absolutely do here is focus on safety, focus on having safe vehicles on the road. Yes, there are procedural issues which we talked about, which it's more about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, which is about the having waivers in place for single supplier frameworks, etc. But it's very different to not filling out DBS checks.
So, Chair, I think if this is a new issue, I'd be far more sympathetic. But we're seeing time and time again this very same matter being raised. when they're looking at the fleet maintenance and a very high spending department. So surely by now, arrangements should be put in place to ensure that compliance with procurement regulations is achieved. That is my point.
Can I invite the council's leader, Rob Stewart, to comment on this one? Because clearly it is an issue of concern, but there's also a desire to provide the service. So I'd be keen to get the leader's comments, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And look, I take the points that many members have made around the fact that we need to take on board recommendations and get those resolved as quickly as possible. But I think what Simon, Stewart and others have done is to explain the most recent situation. They cannot answer either of them for 2008, and neither would I. Those historic ones, and I need to look at whether they are applicable, because they're all being drawn together by the last contributor's sentence as one consistent issue. And again, I would need to look at whether that is the case. I'll repeat the commitment that officers have made that this will be addressed, but also, I would highlight the fact that, as Stuart has said, this is about making sure that we have a fleet which is operating safely, and that we're taking steps to make sure those vehicles are safely and can be operated safely by our staff. And on the balance of risk, I would much rather us come to the report in this authority and explain why we may have stepped outside of some financial controls temporarily, rather than be dealing with a very serious accident or loss of life to one of our staff. So on the balance of risk, that's where I sit. I would also ask that any member of the committee, when addressing issues like this, provide appropriate professional decorum and respect to the officers, because I feel that some of the questioning that we've recently had by the last contributor did overstep that mark, and some of the comparisons were outrageous, quite frankly. So, let's put this into context. Again, for context, this is a high spending department, but not in terms of the overall council budget, which is £900 million, and it's actually one of the smallest departments in the council. So let's have the right comparisons, and let's deal with the issue in a sensible way. Again, as I started my comments, Chair, I think we do have to take the necessary action. The officers have said they are. I'm confident that they will. But again, it's on the balance of risk here, and quite frankly, I'm sure all members on this committee would want us to see us take action that keeps vehicles safe and keeps services running ahead of whether or not we can get through a financial process in a specified amount of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Any further comments?
Well, Chair, thank you. And I do appreciate the leader's comments. No disrespect was intended, Chair. These are just about providing suitable challenge and scrutiny of the issues before us. But I would draw attention to page 45 of the report. And on 45 at the bottom of that section is item 2.24, where this particular issue around compliance with procurement regulations is cited as a high-risk recommendation. It is the only high-risk recommendation in the report, and it says this is a previous recommendation, and it's been made and accepted in 8/9, 12/13, 17/18, 19/20, and the current audit. And that is the point I make, Chair, that this is an area of repeated non-compliance, and it's about when. And notwithstanding the need to keep vehicles on the road in a safe and roadworthy condition, I absolutely uphold that. But this is about compliance with council's procurement regulations. That is the only point I make.
Okay, thank you. I think we note the comments and the concerns. I don't think we can take this any further, other than to ensure that the comments and the concerns from the officers of the council and from the committee members are appropriately recorded. And I'm quite sure there was no intent to be offensive in any way. And I'm sure that's been made clear as well. Are there any more? David Roberts.
Thanks, Chair. It was a question for Stuart, really, just going back to page 41, just in regard to staff expenditure. You mentioned obviously about the overtime payments and the high level with the fitters, but the next paragraph, 2.3.4, mentions about flexi time within the department, and I just wondered how those two interface on a day-to-day basis.
What generally happens is that we've got a flexi-time system which covers for the sort of the office space staff, and the actual manual workforce in there tend to work a shift system. So there's sort of a split arrangement really. So on the we've got a kind of split shift where we've got early and it rotates, but we've got staff in terms of on the workshop floor that start early, overlap in terms of for handovers and finish late. So they're more on shift-based system where the overtime would be sort of required as necessary in terms of for service delivery, but the staff in the sort of back office support, the fleet management sort of side are on the flexi system.
Okay, thanks very much. Just another point, really. Excuse the pun, but is there a drive towards electrification within the fleet, and how many vehicles are currently in that sort of category?
There very much is a drive certainly for the low carbon and the low emission vehicles. To be honest, the number changes out regularly. We're currently the sort of highest public sector fleet in terms of in Wales. I would have to get back to you with the actual numbers, I'm afraid, because they do change quite frequently. But we've had a really good and effective rollout of electric vehicles, certainly for the small vehicle and some into the medium vehicles. Okay. The heavy vehicles are somewhat more challenging. The supply chains are not fully developed, but we've certainly got a trial of an electric refuse vehicle and things at the moment, and looking at both a mix of hydrogen and electric vehicles, so that we get to that fully compliant sort of fleet over the coming years.
It'd be quite interesting, I think, from a cost benefit analysis, to actually see how that marries up maybe in the next year or two, a future date or a future meeting. Thanks very much, Stu, and thanks for stepping in at the last minute.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for those questions. And for you, Simon, maybe that would be an aspect of a future audit to look at the progress being made with the electrification of vehicles, and how that's adding value to the council.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that, Chair, I'll add that to the programme, and obviously as this is a moderate report, we will be bringing back a follow-up outcome to the committee in due course. So when we complete that follow-up work, I'll feed that outcome back to committee in one of the monitoring reports in due course.
Thank you. I think it's, as I say, it's fair for the committee to challenge the non-compliance. But in the context of that, I think we need to recognise the risks associated with achieving compliance and increasing the risk of vehicle failure or issue. So it's a fine balance, and I take assurance that both Stuart and his team are going to focus on not repeating this again, so that we can avoid a critical report in the future. And yes, please, Simon, if you could bring something back within the next 6 months. I think we should recognise that action's already being taken by reducing that 900 figure down to the 350 by whatever action you've taken to enable that to be demonstrated. But clearly we must recognise the concern around the non-compliance issues within the procurement. But thank you, Stuart, for attending, and thank you for responding to the questions in the manner that you have. If we can move on to the next item, which is the accounts receivable, and I think it's Michelle Davis, and I'm not sure if Rachel. I think Michelle has got a problem with that camera, so we'll only hear Michelle's voice. So apologies for that. So Michelle, if it's over to you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm here to present the summary report from the accounts receivable section for this particular Governance and Audit Committee meeting. It's a continuation of the themes that were in previous reports, primarily around the debt recovery areas and the unpaid invoices on the section. I'll assume everybody's read the report, so I'll just touch on the main points from that are in this summary report for this meeting. We've got, out of 14 audit action plan points, we've got 3, one of which is high risk, 2 which are medium risk, and these are continued from previous reports. The report sets out the progress that the section has made in the intervening period from the last Governance and Audit Committee meeting to the current one. So with regards to the high risk action point on escalating debts in a timely on a timely basis. Obviously, this is something that we work on continuously. With the staffing levels, it's not possible to get to every backlog invoice, but we are constantly working on that as a priority. We have, sorry, I'm just reading here. The priorities are regularly reviewed and the progress is monitored, and we have a work plan in place to cover that. Some particular statistics relating to progress made. The team have issued a further 51 invoices to the legal department for progression, and that's to a total value of £102,000. In addition, since the last report, all write-offs have been approved and closed on the system, and that includes the ones specifically mentioned in the January meeting. To give you some context there on values, for the whole year, there were 583 invoices written off. These are invoices from previous years, not the last year's invoices. So these are within the last financial year, we wrote off 583 invoices, which spanned many years previously, so they were quite old. Of those 583, that totalled £606,000, and of that total, £409,000 was the recent approval of invoices that were written off in March. So everything is up to date in that area of work. And that was enabled following the change that was approved in the Council Constitution in a meeting on the 30th of March. Backlog of unpaid invoices. So this is the debt recovery activity that we do. I've put some statistics there, giving you a comparison to the previous report and to the current position. There have been a number of challenges. So the committee is asked to note that the Oracle Fusion system cut over to the live system in April. There was a blackout period of a few weeks, and obviously there was a impact on the live team while that new system bedded in. The team had to learn the system. We were dealing with some functionality issues, technical issues, etc., etc. So obviously that did impact at that time and continues to impact as we speak. Despite the challenges, we've more or less maintained a static position in the outstanding debt of over 365 days old. So that was pleasing to note, given that, you know, the impacts that we'd seen with the new system. Just a point on the middle category of old debt, the 60 to 365 days. This is on page 55 of the pack. 14, that has increased, but 14% of that is old, and 75% of that debt is younger than 4 months old. So, you know, it just gives you a little bit of context there. It's not all very old debt within that middle group there. And then obviously appropriate, the third point, appropriate follow-up procedures with debtors or services and diarising reviews. We continue to have debt recovery activity meetings and review all of our debt, as I've said previously. So I won't repeat the points there. They are in my earlier point as well. They cross over. That said, we've got some challenges remaining. The implementation of Oracle Fusion, as I've said, continues to impact the performance of the AR team. The staff are learning the new system, and the staff that have rolled off the project and come back to the team are still actually supporting the wider community, supporting the main team, and dealing with new issues as they arise. We've also got some functionality features that do not exist in the new system that did exist in the old system, and that is impacting us in terms of flexibility and what we can do. It's primarily around invoices being collected by direct debit, but that is causing us a lot of additional administration work that is slowing work down. We've still got the global economic position impacting the council's ability to collect outstanding debts, and that will continue into the future. But we continue to apply a flexible collection policy in line with all of our authority criteria. So again, I've mentioned this previously, but this remains a challenge, the implementation of the statutory debt repayment plan under the breathing space regulatory umbrella. So that is expected in 2024. So this will remain on the report. So this report, we've added a couple of appendices. We've got the full action plan, which you can see the vast majority are good practice or low risk recommendations, and only 2 medium risk and 1 high risk recommendation, which are obviously our top priorities. So that's the complete summary of that report. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a very detailed summary of the current position. Obviously, this is an area the committee kept under its radar because of the pressures in the department, and which has been impacted further by the current economic difficulties experienced by the public areas. Ben, do you want to add to what Michelle has just been saying?
It's really to repeat and echo it, and it's unusual for me in one sense, but it is to emphasise exactly what Michelle has said. Look, this is a perennial issue report that the committee has been very closely scrutinising. Would I have preferred some of the metrics to have been even better? Yes, in an ideal world, but for the circumstances that Michelle and her team have been working under, including Oracle implementation, frankly, treading water is about as good as it could have got. And as you can see, in terms of a number of proposals fully implemented, and certainly that major issue we had in terms of some of the constitutional blockages, Michelle's officers, Simon's officers could not have been more active after the 30th of March Council for me to make sure that I undertook everything I could on the 31st of March to get stuff off the books for last year. There were procedural bits which we couldn't do. Effectively, it delegated more powers to me to discharge duties on behalf of the council, and I would pay great credit to all officers concerned on that. And as I say, on the raw reading of it, it would have been nice to have been better on some of the metrics, but the metrics that Michelle has explained, especially where some of the debt has only just ticked over into the next category, I still think it it should be recognised how significant the performance has been, even if the headline metrics didn't make it as good as would have been in an ideal situation, given the real pressures that the team have been under. So I would just want the committee to understand my context and take on it. I do think committee will still continue to be interested in it, given the metrics, and will still require further review of it, given the metrics could be better. But I think the explanation Michelle has given fully does demonstrate that this one's been taken seriously and tremendous effort has been applied in very, very challenging circumstances by all concerned. And I would wish to recognise that on the record, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Ness, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to reiterate, the implementation of Oracle with all back office teams and services obviously has an impact, has impacted over the course of April and May due to downtime, but also due to just starting to use a new system. There have been particular challenges within Michelle's team, as she mentioned, with regard to the direct debit interface. And that's actually a problem that other organisations have also encountered, and it has been escalated to Oracle headquarters to resolve, and we're waiting for them to find a system solution to that. And in the meantime, though, it does mean that the team are having to find workarounds which are taking longer, unfortunately. But having said that, the other challenges that come along with the immediate implementation, obviously, those challenges will ease now as the team are getting more used to using the system, and the period of downtime obviously is finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Ness. Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yes, still on the same comment about Oracle. I can imagine that for Michelle and your department, it must have been really frustrating, because I get the impression that you've been working really hard to deal with the issues that we've raised and got you to come back and talk about each meeting. So I mean, I've had so many experience in the past of new computer systems, and I have never known a single one to go smoothly. They never do. There are always lots of issues, and you have my total sympathy that not only have you got issues, you've got things that are no longer even there that you were using beforehand. So I've got a lot of sympathy for what all I really want on this committee is assurance that you are doing as much as you can despite all the difficulties and obstacles that you're up against. But again, I repeat, you've got my sympathy.
Thank you, Leslie. Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and your team really for, it has been a huge change really from, I think, when this report came to audit. I can't remember, a couple of years ago now. Just a point of clarification on 54, you actually say the team are continuing to focus on completing a review, the oldest debts, high value and so on. What is classed as a high value? What is the cutoff when it becomes a high value debt? And also you actually say that you're analysing the outstanding debt and move the lens to shift activities onto a different debt area. I know you mentioned about the, the global economic situation and so on. So is there a particular problem in any particular area at the present time?
Thank you for those questions. In terms of your first question about the value of the debt, what's considered a high value? Invoices can be literally any value. They can be for £500,000 or they can be for £20. So we see a whole spectrum of values. Generally, we would look at anything over £1,000 and consider that a high value invoice, although we do refer invoices to legal for less than that. So that is, we take all values into account when we take every debt as a potential income, and given the same amount of diligence then in terms of recovery. But obviously anything over £10,000 is definitely high value. So what you will find is that you will get certain service areas will generally have lower value debts, maybe high volume, lower value. Other service areas may have lower volume, but all high value. So it depends on the service area. So when I talk about analysing what's outstanding and shifting the lens, because there is so many invoices at the moment in the system, we will look at different areas. We will look at what's there. If there's a high volume of a particular service area, then we'll focus on that. We may work with that service area to improve recovery in terms of monitoring, engagement with the customers, etc., to get that recovery of income improved, and from the start, rather than waiting for it to build up as an arrears or a backlog of debt. So we take a holistic approach to the whole debt recovery in the system, but we have to tailor it depending on the service area, because they vary so greatly. I mean, the authority is like 100 different businesses under one umbrella, because each service area is so different. So yeah, so we will look at that and we will target different areas with each different analysis. We haven't got enough staff to be able to focus on all the areas completely all the time. So we take that approach to try and cover all aspects and all service areas in the recovery. Does that answer all of your questions?
That's very, very good and clear, actually. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I've got Julie Davis and then Phil Sharman. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you once again, Michelle, for the very comprehensive report. I think the committee understands the difficulties that you've been facing. I would like to take you to the audit report, finding Sorry, I've just lost it. Paragraph 226, which is a low risk finding, but it states that income should be clawed back from a service if a dispute is not resolved within 6 months. Could you confirm whether this is happening or will happen, please? Because your agreed action seems to lack a bit of clarity on this.
Yeah, this is where invoices have been on dispute, and the action to resolve the dispute goes back to the service department. So the action isn't with accounts receivable. However, our accounting instruction says that all disputes should be resolved, ideally within 14 days, but as soon as possible. Unfortunately, not all disputes are resolved that quickly, and they can remain on dispute for a long time. We produce monthly stats which go out to all service departments every month for disputed invoices. What we do, and we may have missed this one because of a lack of resource on the team at that particular time. We have been under a number of different pressures with absences and obviously the project as well, and new staff coming in. So we may have left an invoice on dispute. The service department haven't resolved it, and we've not then reviewed it. So what we would do, if it's been on dispute for a long time, i.e. over 6 months, which is a very long time in terms of that not being resolved, then we would check with the service department why that hasn't happened. If they've been actively working on it and there is a valid reason why that it hasn't been resolved, then that's fine. We will allow that to continue. But sometimes there's just been no action. So what we will do, they'll have 2 opportunities to resolve that dispute, and then we will assume that the invoice is invalid and we will actually cancel that invoice. So the income then, the credit that is raised to the service department ledger when the invoice is raised, is then cancelled and is clawed back. So they get debited, because until that point, there's no impact from that dispute not being resolved. So we have a procedure to do that twice a year. And obviously we had missed it in that one instance, but that is something that is definitely in place, and that process is happening on a regular basis and ongoing.
Thank you for clarifying. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Phil Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. On page 54, I'm looking for some clarification. Paragraph 2.2 makes reference to the recommendation 365. It says all invoices should be escalated on a timely basis in accordance with protocols. And then it goes on to say this recommendation has been implemented. But when I flick back to Simon's report, back at agenda item 6, on page 11, Simon says that is reviewed invoices unpaid after 90 days, and he finds there was over 5,000 with a total value of 2.9 million, which had not yet been sent to legal to pursue. So I just need to understand better how one report is saying the recommendation's been implemented, and yet audit are finding there's still a big slab of invoices that have not been referred to legal.
Okay. What I think the difference there is that it's implemented but not fully completed. So there is a large number of invoices on the system. We continually prioritise and progress them, but we cannot say at this point that everything that should have been progressed has been progressed. And this is why this is a continuing theme in our summary reports, and this action point is continuing as well. So we only have a very small number of staff on the team. There is a backlog, and with the number of invoices that are unpaid on the system, then it's not been possible with that level of resource to clear it all. But that doesn't mean it's not being worked on. It's always being worked on. I haven't put this statistic in the report, but what I can tell you is that we provide a statistic to the audit report, internal audit report every year, and it looks at the volume of invoices percentage-wise that are paid within a year. So for the last internal audit report, we actually had 93% of invoices that were recovered within 1 year. So, and that was covered the period of 2021. We have to allow that amount of time to pass before we can provide the statistic. But when you look at it in that context, we have got a 93% recovery rate on all of the invoices that are raised on the system. And in addition to that, for that year, there were 19,280 invoices raised for £88 million. So, you know, these are invoices that are, it's that small percentage that remains unrecovered and builds up for previous years. Within each year, we are recovering the vast majority and working on the highest value invoices as a priority, because that makes the most sense and the best use of the resource to do so. But because a lot of the invoices, the volume is higher with lower value, they don't always get to the top of the priority list as much as they should. But that isn't to say that they totally ignored the whole of the time. So I hope that does provide you with some more context and answers your question, but please let me know if you need more information.
Thank you for putting it into context. That's really helpful, Michelle. Ben, got a follow-up point to make on that?
No, I decided not to come in, Chair, because it was going to be along the same lines as Michelle had indicated in terms of making inroads too. That's not the same as clearing all of it. And I think Michelle's answer does give a degree of assurance. Phil is quite right to make the point that there are still further inroads to be made. So that was all I'd indicate. So apologies. That's why I put my hand down, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I think it was an important point that Michelle made there about the 93%. David.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks, Chair. Just picking up on the same point, really, as Phil, in regard to 3.6.5 on page 54. It mentions, obviously, the decision made on whether to write off the debt or seek a legal recourse. What's the actual process in making that decision, please?
The decision to write off?
Well, to write off or to actually seek a legal recourse to it?
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. So there is a written legal protocol in place, which is quite detailed, sets out in what circumstances, values, etc., that we refer invoices to legal. I can tell you that everything over £400 will be referred to legal, provided, but there is a caveat to that, provided that the service department provides the Audit section with evidence of that debt, which is required under there are debt recovery regulations that require us to do that. So we have to obtain evidence of the debt from the service department, the legal basis for that debt, to then pass that on to our internal legal department to recover that invoice. And even when we refer it to legal, it doesn't always guarantee success. We can even get invoices into court and with a judgment, and you still don't get payment, because that's the nature of some individual customers. After that, if it remains unpaid, we've usually done a lot of due diligence before it gets to the point where it's put on to a pending write-off status. So at that point, it's been the invoice has been sent. We've sent 2 letters. We've chased it manually. Staff have chased it. We have been back to the service department. We have vetted that customer. We've used all the tools at our disposal, which includes internal database systems within the authority, external sites like Experian, that sort of thing, to vet the customer. We make sure that we've got up-to-date contact details for that customer for any reminder letters. And if at the end of all of that, and we get a picture of the circumstances of that debtor, we decide that there is no further recourse of action, either having been down the legal route or not, depending on values, because court entry fees are significant. That has to be brought into balance when you make that decision, and that is part of our protocol. So at that point, we complete a write-off decision form, and that write-off decision can either come from the legal department, either from the service department, or we can make that decision within the AR team itself. But either way, there will be protocols around that. So once it goes on to the pending write-off status after it's passed all of those stages. Then it goes on to a write-off report. That then goes through various different portals, if you like, or people to approve. It'll go to legal department, internal audit, and then finally we'll have the Chief Finance Officer's approval for sign off, and then it gets closed on the system at that point. So there's quite a lot of due diligence goes into making sure that we do as much as we can before we write off. So we don't write off unnecessarily. In fact, if I could do that, then we wouldn't have any outstanding invoices on the system, and I wouldn't be here, you know, answering a lot of questions.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for a comprehensive response. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Not another hand. Ben, do you want to add to that?
So yes, just to add to that, yes, Michelle has very thoroughly explained it. I would add one further rider, which is bottom line is every ultimate decision is mine, delegated on your behalf to make the decision as a Section 151 officer. But I do reserve the right to pursue any debt for any amount, even if it was for 3p, even if it cost a fortune to collect it, if it was in the public interest to do so. I wouldn't want anyone to be under any impression that you can get away with any certain amount. You know, I know Michelle referenced amounts and there are trigger points, and she's quite right to reference that we weigh the cost of enforcing a debt versus the impact on the individual, but I do also reserve the right to pour in corriger les autres at all times because we are dealing with taxpayers' money. So I just wanted to add that further rider.
Quite right, Ben. I'm sure you will as well. If there are no other questions on that, then thank you, Michelle, for a very comprehensive report. I think we must recognise the huge amount of work you've already put into presenting the picture as it is, with the difficulty you're encountering with Oracle Fusion. I think we need to keep it on the Governance and Audit Committee's work plan for a further follow-up in 6 months, I would suggest, just to make sure things are still on track. And I'm sure you, Simon, will be doing our routine follow-ups.
So yes, thanks, Chair. Obviously, this is one of the fundamental audits, so it'll form part of the fundamental recommendation tracker review, which is normally done November time. And obviously, this is one of the annual audits on our fundamental programme. So again, there'll be a full audit for this one in the current financial year as well.
Thank you. Thank you for all those questions as well on that report. If we can, it's for noting that that report is. We're happy to note that report in that case then. Do we need a vote on that? No. Okay. If we can move on then to agenda item 9, which is the DBS. And I'm not sure who's presenting this one.
It'll be myself, Chair. And,
very quiet.
oh, I'll try and project more. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Because I've got 3 names. I've got Emma Johnson, Rachel Davis and Jeff Fish.
Yeah, it's myself, Rachel. I have had problems with my volume, so please do indicate if it seems to drop again.
Okay.
So I'll present the report, and Emma Johnson, our help desk and workforce manager who manages the DBS process, is also here to assist committee with any questions that you might have on detail shortly. Perfect. So this is I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is a full information report on the outcome of the internal audit report into the Council's disclosure and barring service process, more commonly known as the DBS for short. These are checks that are carried out on employees who work directly with children and vulnerable adults. So the majority of the checks are carried out on staff within our workforce groups from across social care, education and schools. The audit report was issued in February. And it was rated moderate with 6 recommendations issued. This was a decrease from 12 on the previous audit. 2 recommendations are high risk and 1 is a medium risk. The second page of my report details those 3 recommendations, and I'll just explain what actions are being taken for each of those before sharing some additional thoughts and options for exploration that we'll look at to try and improve the situation further. So 2.5.1 recommends a robust process for ensuring risk assessments are in place whilst we are awaiting for DBS checks to be received. The process is that all risk assessments must be sent into the service centre in order for us to maintain a single central register. And the help desk and workforce manager approves them upon receipt. Action is taken by the service centre staff to inform and remind managers and head teachers in schools when risk assessments are needed, and that's drawn from a monthly scheduled report. And in addition to that, the service centre staff have been proactively contacting managers and head teachers to prompt further the need to assist with timely returns of risk assessments, and we are seeing an improvement in the submission rate on that. 2.7.4 is similar in nature to the risk assessment process. This is ensuring that a robust system is in place for renewals to be completed before a DBS expires. I think it's worth noting at this point that with the exception of social care staff who are mandatory required to register with Social Care Wales and have a valid up-to-date DBS check as part of that registration, there isn't an expiry date on a DBS check. However, the council quite rightly, as you would expect, would choose to follow best practice with renewing DBS checks on a regular interval, and 3 yearly is the time frame in which has been selected. But employees who are going through the renewal process, I think it's worth mentioning, they do have a DBS check and they all will have had a DBS check. Some for many years, depending on the length of their employment. They are not new employees coming in who have no check and we don't know anything about their employment history. The service centre will notify individuals 4 months prior to the expiry of their DBS check that it is due to come to an end and they need to renew it. This is through electronic communication with staff, and they have a reminder every 5 days sent to them with the link that they can directly click on to start the application process. To assist with raising awareness about the importance of the timeliness, the help desk and workforce manager is going to start making school visits from September to ensure DBS records are being set up and managed correctly, and this will help support and give additional training to our school-based colleagues who are outside of the corporate centre and perhaps a little more distant from being able to engage in the same way. We've also had significant help from education colleagues, which we are very grateful in this raising awareness of the importance of timeliness of DBS renewals being undertaken. And the report details the list of activities that have happened in the spring term to talk to governors, head teachers, school business managers about this really important issue. And then recommendation 2.7.2 is in relation to ensuring that we've got correct data capture between information we receive from our DBS provider and their system and Oracle Fusion, the council's internal system. This is now a daily task for the service centre staff to complete, as is the requirement for them to upload risk assessments when they are received by managers and from head teachers. So the report also touches on some further actions that we will explore to look to improve the process where we can. We are going to think about escalation routes for non-compliance, in addition to reporting through to CMT quarterly, where we have perhaps concerns in some areas where non-compliance might be at risk. We're also going to look at opportunities to talk about further automation and integration between the system that our DBS provider uses and Oracle Fusion. We know that manual intervention, where you're transposing data from one system to another, does come with human error on occasion. Maybe that's, a wrong number is entered or a wrong date is applied. So we will have conversations to see how can we look to explore integration between the two and reduce that manual intervention. And also we will look to explore what value the DBS update service might be able to bring to the council. This would be a replacement of the current renewal process we have in place. And rather than conducting a brand new application every 3 years, if we were to explore the update service, that would enable us as an employer to run an automated check at a frequency of our choosing, providing we have notified employees who are part of that update service, and it would remove the requirement to go through the full application process. Obviously, there are administrative implications, cost implications, service user or end user implications, I should say. So we will need to explore whether that is a viable option for us. But again, it's something that is on the list because we aspire to have zero non-compliance rate in this area because of the importance of safeguarding. So if there is any small thing that we can do to improve the situation, we will look into it and recommend it where appropriate. Happy to take questions or bring in Emma, depending on the detail required. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that detailed report. Are there any questions, please? Councillor Walton?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Very pleased to hear that you're going to be sending officers out to schools to give the schools support. I think that's an excellent idea. At the moment, though, you send out reminders every 5 calendar days. Do you do anything else, like actually speak to the staff or ask the schools to approach the staff? Because it seems to me that that's the biggest issue you've got at the moment. And of course, it's a very important one that existing staff are not always getting their DBS renewed. Thanks.
Yeah, so if I take that one, thank you for the question. Yeah, so following the monthly renewal reports, especially for schools, I check them and see who hasn't completed them in a timely manner, and I contact the school directly myself. And then we'll chase it up that way as well with the schools. So they get the automated reminders. The school also gets the reminder as well, because the school is set up as the manager on the application form. So they get copied into every email that the school, the applicant gets. But I'll just email them as well to say, you know, this person hasn't completed their application form. Is there a reason for it? And just to give them that little prompt, really, and to see what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ness, do you want to come in here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to sort of make clear that distinction. So as Rachel said, you know, schools are that bit removed from ourselves, and it is the chair of the governing body that has responsibility for ensuring that the school employees have the DBS in place. And so by strengthening the connection that we have with the governance arrangements with the school, that will help us to ensure that the right people are getting the reports that identify who hasn't got an up-to-date DBS, and so the appropriate action can be taken. And I think, therefore, the action that Rachel mentioned about the school visits that are going to happen is going to be really helpful too, just to ensure that although we are that step removed, we are supporting the schools so that they understand what the data is telling them and what the process is for addressing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ness. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just have clarification? Obviously, schools bring in cover, say, for staff from agencies for the cover maternity leave or things like that. Does a DBS check then gets carried out by the agency and by the school? Is they got to have the dual DBS checks to make sure that that member or that individual has the appropriate documentation in place?
Yeah, so it's the agency's responsibility to ensure that the DBS check is in place before that person is sent into the school, and the DBS is of the correct level as well. And what the school should be doing then when the person starts on their first day is see their certificate, so they can confirm that that person has got the correct level of check and is in date as well. Yeah, so it's always the agency's responsibility for that.
Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just a comment, Rachel, regarding the 120 days. It appears to me if it's every 5 days, they would have 24 reminders here for to get the DBS completed. That seems well, not only is excessive. I mean, there's no reason or excuse for anybody to fail to fill in or to do their renewals. And on that point, and a similar point on 2.7.4, this regarding a total of 9 employees without completing that renewal form. I mean, is there any kind of sanction imposed upon these members of staff who have not completed their DBS forms?
All of the, I should say, thank you. I should say all of the examples in the audit report are resolved and they're no longer outstanding, they're complete, and we're satisfied that all of the checks are, and balances are in place. In terms of the sanctions, there isn't a sanctions approach to this because our staff know that DBS checks and renewals are obviously a top priority for us and they will be expected to complete them. Our contract of employment, when staff renew, also indicates that there is a duty on employees to go through this process and also to notify us if there's any change to their circumstances in between the period by which they will have one DBS check to the next. But in terms of us wanting to get the checks done, it's encouragement, it's support, it's advice, it's training, and it's reiterating the awareness of having that completed. You're right in terms of a frequent reminder of 5 days feels like a lot, and someone may have a very full inbox if they haven't clicked on the link and made the progress. We have also got some work in place whereby if we suspect perhaps an email address might be incorrect, might be wrong, and the person is not then receiving those notifications, that will be raised and questioned as well. And Emma might want to come in to say, you know, what further chasing goes on within departments for those 5-day renewals when we're not getting anywhere with them. Emma, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so if the 5-day reminders are getting ignored for a long period of time, what we started doing is changing the application email to their manager. So the manager gets the email and then we'll sit with the applicant, the manager or the school verification officer will sit with the applicant and complete their application with them instead of them completing it via their email, because sometimes we don't get told when their email address is updated or needs to be updated. So that's when we check then. So we run an audit report off ebook and check what's been outstanding for a long period of time and just chase it up that way as well. So that's something new that we've introduced too.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. It's quite clear you're doing all you can to get these forms returned. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, did you want to add to that?
Yes, if I could, Chair. I'm probably going back to Councillor Walden's primary question in terms of responsibility at schools. I just wanted to echo what Rachel has already said and the other contributors. It's now my responsibility as well under my role as stakeholder and school support manager within education. And I just wanted to give you assurance, Leslie and all members, that there's been a really heightened approach with schools here, as I said, allowing for the responsibility with chairs, the governors, etc. But there's been a real strong messaging here. There was mention made of sanctions that yes, ultimately, you know, the sanction is that it is required for continued employment. So, you know, pay could be withdrawn. I'm content that the message has been heard. We're also doing some very operational challenges as well. Myself and the school improvement team are working with Emma now on a more frequent and regular basis. It comes to our school. I think it's one of the items that Rachel has captured in her commentary. It now comes to the school's issues forum that sits monthly, and that deals with issues and risks. So there's an absolute focus there. And myself and Emma are now really being forensic in regarding understanding why there are ones that are not compliant. And in fact, I've received the June report from Emma this morning, and looking through that and understanding that. And there are reasons why people are on the list as non-compliant, but there is a reason behind that. So we're looking at more forensically disaggregating the data. So that we get to, as Rachel said, that absolutely 100% compliance. So I just wanted to give those assurances, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. David?
Hiya, thanks, Chair. Rachel, thanks for the report. It was just really there's a heavy education element within the report, which I understand. But from a social services and children's services perspective, you mentioned obviously about the qualified staff and their regulatory compliance. But in regard to the unqualified staff, both in social services and children's, is it the same standard of approach from yourselves? Thank you.
The approach would be the same if you need a DBS check for your role. So if you're in regulated activity, then our approach would yes, be the same. I should have probably also mentioned that with the Social Care Wales registration requirements, which is every 3 years, if you can't complete that registration process, and that might be because you haven't reapplied for your DBS check, then you're not able to practice. So that does have quite serious consequences for social care staff if they fail to complete their registration in a timely manner, and the DBS is obviously linked to that. There isn't such a similar consequence currently with the education and the school side, but yeah, we would treat anyone the same if they require a DBS, no matter what their role is.
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you.
I'll take one more comment now because I minded of the time. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. And it is just a comment. From a business efficiency perspective, it sounds, listening to all the workarounds in place in terms of renewals, it should be fairly easy for you to justify automating the DBS update process.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, it is. As I say, it's listed in the report as a future action for us to explore, and it very may well end up being a recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all, Jeff, Rachel and Emma. Thank you for that report and thank you for the comments. So if we can move on to the next agenda item, minded of the time, because I know some councillor members have to go to other meetings. So if we can move on to agenda item 10. Simon?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I try not to keep it too long. This is just the standard outcome report summarising the results of the follow-up work completed in Q4. So these are just the standard follow-ups that we do as part of our normal audit follow-up process. The table on on page 84, shows that of 87 recommendations checked, 85 had been fully implemented in the period. So the charts there show the split between the medium risk, high risk, medium, low and good practice risk, So there's only 2 low risk recommendations not implemented. The detail of the follow-ups that were completed can be seen in Appendix 1, which lists the audits themselves and the assurance rating. And then Appendix 2 just gives some detail of the 2 low-risk recommendations that we found hadn't been implemented. Again, they're low risk, so they aren't considered to be too risky, shall we say. Again, Chair, this is the standard monitoring report for members. If I have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions for Simon on this report? No, not seeing any hands up in the room. Julie?
Yeah, sorry. In terms of the recommendations not implemented in respect to the Food and Safety Division and the disposal of electronic records, will this be picked up as part of the deferred review of the flare replacement, please, that you note on page 28 of the pack?
I can add that into that review, Julie. Yes, that's fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Simon? No, nothing in the room. Nothing on screen. Okay, if we can move on to, thank you, Simon, for that. If we can move on to agenda item 11, which is Audit Wales. Gillian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is just our annual audit summary, which summarises the work we've completed since our last annual audit summary was issued to you in March 2022. It is literally just a summary of all the work that we've already reported to you during the year to discharge the Auditor General's statutory responsibilities. So there's nothing new in this report. I just wanted to draw your attention to the main points. That the Auditor General gave an unqualified opinion on all financial statements on the 31st of March 2023. In respect of the continuous improvement requirement, the AGW certified the Council had met its remaining local government measure duties for 21-22. And we've undertaken insurance and risk assessment reviews to review the arrangements the Council put in place to get value for money from its resources. Which focused on the arrangements in relation to the Local Government and Elections Act 2021, carbon reduction plans and the financial position. So I've just said the findings from all this work has previously been reported to you and the links to them are included in the report. We also consider the reports of other inspectorates, Care Inspectorate Wales and Estin. and the links to their reports are also in our annual audit summary. And then, as well as the local work at each council, we also carry out studies across the local government sector, and the reports that we've published nationally are also detailed in the report with links to it. And finally, the report then just details our ongoing work and updates progress on that is reported to you quarterly. If anyone's got any questions, myself and Non Jenkins would be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Are there any hands up in the room? Phil Sharma.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also for Audit Wales in presenting this report. Chair, I do think this is an important report that this committee receives. It is the annual report from the Auditor General, and as Gillian's indicated, summarises the work completed at Swansea through the year. So in that respect is important stewardship account. I've just got a couple of questions to put to the team. I find the section on the auditor's duties very clear, thank you. And then coming on to the next page, that was on page 94, coming on to the next page 95, what we found. Gillian, the first question is that in the inset box, it sitting under the audit of the accounts, it talks about specific projects, audit work of regulators, and so on to form an opinion on value for money. Is that inset box relating to the accounts or to the value for money bit, which comes further on?
Do you mean the grey box at the top of page 95?
Yeah, the grey box with the tick in it, which sits below the heading, the audit of the council's accounts. I just wondered to what extent that does relate to the accounts rather than to value for money. That was the question.
It's to the whole audit that
whole
relates
audit.
to. Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, going on, when we come to the value for money bit then, because the accounts part is quite clear to us, and I know we looked at that at a previous meeting. When we look at value for money, there's a series of aspects. I think they go on to page 96, for example, where yes, you set out essentially the pieces of work that have been done. In the duties section, though, it says that yes, the Auditor General has to examine whether the council has put in place arrangements to get value for money, and the Auditor General has to be satisfied that it has done this. So I just wonder whether, taking account of the matters that you list on page 96, whether you're able to actually form a conclusion. In other words, are you actually able to say that yes or no, does the council have the arrangements in place to secure value for money?
Do you want to answer that, Non?
Non, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there. In terms of an overall value for money conclusion, there isn't an overall value for money conclusion in there, but what you will see as part of each and every part of our work is basically built into that is the tests in terms of efficiency, effectiveness and economy, and also sustainability in terms of the well-being and future generations work. So we're trying to build it into every piece of our work so that when you do get the conclusions, that it's built into the conclusion of every piece of work rather than it be a specific on its own conclusion. Hope that helps.
Yes, that's okay. I do understand. It's just I was trying to balance it with 94, where it says the Auditor General has to be satisfied. And what you're saying is you form that decision on each piece of work delivered rather than in the round within the annual report.
Yeah, because what we're looking at are risk based and key issues, I suppose, in that sense. So when we're looking at that, we form a view as to whether you've been the 3 E's and the 5 ways of working, and that's reflected in each of the projects. So it comes out through that.
Norm, thank you. That's clear to me. Chair, perhaps I could therefore ask and even recommend that this report goes through to full council in due course.
I believe this does go to full council at some point in time with the accounts. But maybe Ben, can you confirm if it does go to full council? Or
I can't confirm because I'm not sure that it does go to full council. It's the ISO 315 as it will become will go to full council, but I don't think this does, Chair.
Or Chair, some other reporting route. So in other words, it doesn't just stop with us. I think it is an important kind of set piece for the year. And from that point of view, it'd be useful to have kind of on the record for an executive committee.
Has it been to Cabinet, Ben? Has this report been to the Cabinet?
I would again say no. I don't believe it's gone to either. Ness has indicated she wants to come in, but I don't believe it has goes to Cabinet or Council. I do accept the point that Phil is making. That,
Yeah.
It's nothing to stop it being reported to those ultimately charged with discharging the duties rather than just being received by this committee, which I think is the point that Phil is making.
Yeah. Non, can I ask that you take it to Cabinet for approval for it to go to full council?
Sorry, I should leave that with you. I don't know if Ness wants to come in here because it's
sorry, Ness, I meant.
So, yeah, not.
I did mean Ness. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, I think we can certainly just discuss it with Democratic Services as to whether it needs to go to Cabinet then Council, given it's for information rather than approval by Council. So I think it could just go as a for information report.
I'd certainly advise, Chair, it should, certainly would support Ness's position. It should only go to one or the other. I think we'd take advice from the monitoring officers whether it's a reserved matter or not. I suspect it's not, given we've never taken it before. So to the Cabinet, to the Executive would probably suffice. But certainly I would echo, I'd only want to do it once. But it then addresses the point that Phil has rightly raised, that it is then us addressing it to the Executive or full council rather than just sitting at this committee.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Any other comments on this one? Julie?
Thank you, Chair. On page 98, in respect to social enterprises, state that most councils aren't fulfilling their obligations in terms of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Are you able to confirm whether Swansea Council falls into this category? And if so, do you have any examples of best practice that you can share with the council?
Thanks for that. The report has been published. I can't answer you about Swansea, but it will be in the report as to if we've concluded that. It'll be in the report that's been published on our website. I can send you the link for the information. If it's not in that report, I can send that separately to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Non.
And a second question, which might be to you, Chair. On the Assurance and Risk Assessment Progress Update, the report says at page 3 that at the time of your work, Council were progressing their participation strategy. Chair, are we able to request a progress update to be provided to a future committee meeting, or is this something that is being tracked by Scrutiny Committee?
Is this the transformation strategy you're referring to?
Participation.
Participation. I think we'll take that outside of the meeting. And yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is separate. It's a requirement under the Local Government and Elections Wales Act that we had a new public participation strategy. So we can take it outside as to whether it is appropriate to come here. I think it's also being looked at by the Democratic Services Committee, but I may have got that wrong. I don't know if Hugh, are you on the call and you could in the meeting? Otherwise, we'll have to come back and confirm later on.
Who's not there? Ness, can we take this outside the meeting and we bring
Yes,
it
of
back
course.
we put it as an action on the action plan, and maybe you can give us an update at a future meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie, for raising that. Dawn?
Sorry, just to come back on what Julie said, I put the link in the chat for the social enterprises report. You should have had it separately anyway, but it's there for ease of reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions, David?
Just one really, going back to a similar theme to social enterprise. It mentions on page 97 about direct payments. Now, I know from my own professional background and working in the NHS, this has been around for a number of years. I just wondered, is there an All Wales progress report on direct payments, similar to the social enterprise one? Thanks.
Dawn, are you?
Sorry, yes, sorry, got too many buttons going on at the same time. Yes, there is a national report, hence it's in the annual audit summary there. We haven't done an update on it since we've published that one yet, and we haven't followed that up. You will also have had earlier this year our work programme for the next 3 years and what we are going to be looking at and what we across the board, across public services. But I can also put the link to that report that's in the annual audit summary in the chat now, if that would help. But we haven't done an update. Just to clarify, we haven't done an update on it since that report.
It'd be handy to have that report. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. If there are no further questions, then Noel, Gillian, thank you for that report. The report is for noting. There's a couple of actions that we'll progress through our audit tracker. I am minded of the time, so I need to move quickly on the rest, what's left of the agenda. The next one is the appointment of the Governance and Audit Committee representative on the Strategic Governance Group. Members will be aware that Councillor Leslie Walton has been our representative on this group for some time now, and I'm very grateful for the work that she's done on that group. And I know the officers have welcomed the input that Councillor Walton has given. And as a committee, we've welcomed the assurance that we've received from Councillor Walton. This report is asking the committee to nominate a representative for here on in. And I believe there's also a requirement, and Councillor Walton alerted me to this, for a deputy to be appointed, mainly because to achieve quorum, the representative from Governance and Audit must always be at the meeting. So in case there's ever an instant where that representative is not available, then it's a deputy that's nominated to stand in. Is that right, Councillor Walton?
Yeah, exactly so.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking for a representative from this committee to be the rep on the Strategic Governance Group. Can I have some nominations, please?
Before you actually ask for nominations, you know, we've got some new members here. I hope people have actually read the papers. I know Councillor Walton has actually been a representative for, I think, the last 2 years, but actually reading the papers, it just did say a representative from the governance group for 1 year only. The reason I asked for 1 year only was, I can see Sam Pritchard shaking his head, but that's what it actually says, was to rotate it to give you know, members the opportunity of actually partaking in this. Now, we've got independent members. I'm not quite sure if the independent members can actually partake in this as well. So, you know, to me, it's quite clear for 1 year only, but we seem to have run roughshod actually over that. People take that into account.
Yeah, it is 1 year only, and I think there was a discussion around this when Leslie accepted to take it for the 2nd year, and I think that's where the 2.21 year came in then during that period. So I'm not sure about the question about can lay members be appointed. I'm not sure of that one. Ness, can I come to you again?
Yes, of course. So I think it's for the committee to decide who that representative is and whether that's representative is a councillor or a lay member. That's for the committee to determine. And I think although the term is for a year, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be the same person. It just means the committee needs to take that decision each year.
Chair, can I just say, if Councillor Walton has been kind enough to continue, she's been doing an excellent job. I don't see why we can't put our faith and support behind Councillor Walton again, you know.
Yeah. Is that a proposal, Mike?
Yes, certainly. I will not be to Councillor Walton if we've got a seconder there.
Sam?
Yeah, I would be happy to second, Chair, and just to note that was my understanding as well. The fact that the 1 year refers to the 1 year Councillor Walton has served, and now it is for this committee to elect whoever this committee wishes. And so, with that in mind, I would be happy to second Leslie.
Okay. Are there any other proposals or nominations? No. Do we take a vote on this one now? Yeah. Oh, do you want to have a show of hands? Yeah. Show of hands for Councillor Walton. Everybody in the room have said yes. Show of hands on screen, please. Julie, did you want to say something? The show of hands. Okay. Is everyone okay then? So, yeah. Councillor Leslie Walton, I'm pleased to.
Well, I'll abstain, okay, because I think legally it's full of holes.
I'm looking to Jeremy for advice.
Everybody vote before I can note, Chair, abstain.
Okay, we can note your abstaining.
And we need to reserve as well now, so.
Okay. Ness.
I was just going to come back and say that the group isn't a statutory group in any way. This is a group that has been designed by the council to support our assurance framework. And so to that extent, the terms of reference have been agreed by that group. So I think, as long as the committee is satisfied that you've identified the representative that you want, I don't think we're in breach of any kind of legal aspect, just to clarify that point.
And for 1 year only, obviously, to make the point that's in the document. On the basis that Councillor Walton has been nominated for the rep, we do need to appoint or to nominate a deputy should Councillor Walton not be able to attend. So can we have any proposals for a deputy, please? Any proposals? Do anybody want to do it as a deputy? I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm not seeing any.
I'll propose Phil Charman as an independent member.
Okay. Need to second that, someone? Yeah. Okay, then. Okay.
So, Chair, I'd have to decline that because I don't have sufficient capacity to serve that role, even as a deputy.
Okay.
Sorry, but thank you for the nomination nonetheless.
Any other nominations? Leslie?
I don't know whether he would wish to consider this, but can I nominate Mike White?
Can anybody second that? Yeah, yeah.
I don't mind stepping in if I got two flares, he's not there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Yeah, all approved. Can we have the hands, show of hands, please? Yeah, everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Leslie, for agreeing to continue with that role. I know I find it particularly of value, and I know you and I speak outside of the meeting, and I'm very aware that you do a very thorough job, and also the officers receive what you do very well. So thank you. Quickly move on then to the last two items on the agenda. Ness?
I was just going to reiterate that the group does certainly value Councillor Walton's contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ness. Okay. Agenda item 3 is the tracker report. There's a number of ongoing items to this report, but we've got dates, I believe, for most of them to come back to the committee in due course. The Audit Committee annual report is going to the full council in July, and I've been asked to attend that meeting. Other than that, I don't think there's anything on this tracker. Not seen any hands up, any comments? And the final item on the agenda is the work plan. This is an ongoing sort of plan that we can add to or adjust in any way. So if anybody's got any comments or any additional information that needs to be included, and please can you comment those through to Jeremy so they can be amended or changed.
Yeah.
Alan?
Yeah, if I can make a comment, Chair. Thank you. Just referring back to the minutes on page 6, basically bullet point 2. Bearing in mind that it appears as though we'll get fewer meetings now because they're every 6 weeks instead of every 4. Yeah. Will the need then for training be sort of included in that programme, or will it be something extra? And if so, can the training be sooner rather than later? Thank you.
We've discussed training previously, and I know there is a number of training sessions being considered. I think, am I right in saying, Ness, you were involved in some of this along with Democratic Services?
Yes, yes, that's right.
We just need to populate the plan with the first line with the training, I think.
Yes, so that's something I can pick up after this meeting.
Because there was specific training that was requested by members at the last meeting around terminology, and I think Simon, you were going to do a presentation at one of the sessions. Yeah. So if we can perhaps get that updated for our next meeting.
Yes, indeed, we can do that.
Because that would be the July meeting, so we'll know exactly what's happening. Okay. If there are no more questions on that, then I think that concludes the agenda for today. And I thank everyone for their attendance and participation today. Some very important papers on this agenda and some critical reports. I think we've had sufficient time to challenge and to gain a level of assurance. It was amiss of me not to welcome a new member to the meeting, Adam Davis. I don't know, Adam, if you're still online. Adam, you may have left.
Yeah, I think he had to leave, Chair.
Okay, but if elected members can comment that I try to welcome into the committee, albeit a bit late in the day. And we'll see you at the next meeting, which is in July. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.